Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Building Blocks Quilt-Along. It's time to learn our very last design in our building block, and this is called circuit board. It's basically what happens when you take stippling and you stitch it with straight lines and sharp angles. It's really fun, and I'm going to give you a lot of tips to make it easy. Let's get started. So here's our quilting guide for this design. You can take a look at all of the circuit board shapes that we're going to be working on. If you're looking for this guide, you can find it in the Building Blocks quilt pattern available at leahday.com. Okay, so stitching this design, we're going to be working on 4 different scales. We've got our 1-inch scale, 1/2-inch scale, 1/4-inch scale, and 1/8 inch scale. I have actually managed to mark all of these sections just fine, and you'll probably be able to mark those okay too. Don't get too obsessive if you can't see all the lines or whatever. You can always run your lines along the edge of the block, the perimeter line, or in the ditch if you need to kind of run up against it, travel stitch, and get back into it. That's perfectly fine. I do want you to notice that we are working roughly in rows, just like we work the stippling. We're going to be working in rows from left to right and right to left. That way we fill this and we don't work ourselves in any corners. Now, I didn't mark this little section because I want to show you just how easy it is to freehand this design. Just like stippling, you can freehand this design and stitch it all over your entire quilt very easily. So let's get started. So here's my block, and like I said, I haven't marked this area because I really want to show you how to freehand quilt this. But we're going to stitch in all of these marked lines for now, and I want to emphasize how we're moving through the block and how similar this is to stippling. I know that the straight lines and sharp angles might not feel very similar to stippling, but the movement, how we're flowing through these spaces is what's similar. And the cool thing is that a lot of, pretty much all of these designs, circuit board, stippling, they fit within what I call a family. And so there's a lot more designs even than this to choose from. If you're looking for something that's going to fill your quilt very quickly, that you can just kind of wiggle in there and work in all directions, all over the place, but also fill it very, very logically in rows, look for the independent design family. That's where these fit. And you're going to be able to find lots of designs that will work in your quilts. I hear a lot from quilters, especially after they've been quilting for a little while, I'm just so sick of stippling, I don't want to stipple anymore, I've stippled everything. And, number one, my first response is, well, what did stippling ever do to you? Personally, I think stippling is a beautiful design, and I think it definitely has a good place in the quilting world. But just in case you're sick and tired of it and you don't want to stitch it anymore, stitch circuit board. Change it up, add different elements to it. There's many different ways that you can take stippling and change it, maybe even make it fit better within your quilt. And also, be trying something new, trying something different. You don't have to stick with just the same old thing. And the way this flows is so similar. If you can stitch stippling, then you can stitch so many other designs too. Okay, so that's my 1-inch grid, and you can see how fast that knocked out really, really quickly. Okay, I'm going to travel stitch and get here. I'm going to fill in this section and in this section. I'm going to just speed up the camera so that you can see me flow through both areas fairly quickly. Okay, so we're here in this little tiny section ready to stitch this design on an 1/8 inch scale, and I am going to freehand this. So what am I thinking about as I freehand quilt this? I am thinking about keeping those lines of quilting very close together. I am thinking about straight lines and sharp angles, specifically right angles. And I'm definitely using my hands. That index finger here, you can see that again. I'm definitely using that still to keep control over the foot. I'm moving the block really just with my fingertips in order to make these tiny movements. Now, as far as a practice for freehanding this, let me kind of stitch down and I can kind of show you this. We've already stitched a design called Teeth, and it's just back and forth, straight lines and sharp angles. That is a great practice for this. So if you can't figure out how you're going to stitch, just go up and down, straight lines, sharp angles, just like this. That's a great way to start. When you feel more comfortable with that design, add a little bend in it, stitch a little angle, you know, take a left turn, take a right turn. It's not rocket science, it's just adding that little touch of complexity, and that is what makes the design more intricate. It's what makes the design look like it's very random over the surface of the quilt. Don't get too obsessive about, you know, everything being exactly perfectly spaced apart. I've said this also this month. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to take a ruler to it and make sure that it fits within that 1/8 inch mark. What you want to do is just aim for consistency. You know, try not to get your lines too close together and try not to leave big gaps. Gaps would probably be more noticeable, you know, empty spaces, than having your lines touch. It's you know, but that's debatable. Honestly, I wouldn't pick up a seam ripper if you did happen to stitch a gap into your quilt, or you happen to stitch two lines on top of one another, you know, just travel stitched or something like that. I wouldn't obsess about it. What I mean by a gap is if I, you know, kind of like leave a big section, like I just kind of left that box open and I didn't come in and fill it with anything. Let me kind of show you what I mean. I'll stitch down here and I'll leave a gap intentionally, and you can kind of see it just makes kind of a hole in the texture. You can kind of see that there's a gap there. Stitch up, fill this little area, and then you'll be able to see this. See how I left a little gap right here? Well, because it's right on the edge of the perimeter, I can just still come in here, I can still fix that. It's not the end of the world. That's another thing, because this area is so narrow, it's such a narrow little channel, you're going to be able to wiggle in here and fix most anything. Don't get obsessive about it. Don't get too worried that it's not perfect. Just stitch some straight lines and sharp angles. If you start getting lost or confused, just remember to stitch in rows, left to right and right to left. It's like writing on paper. You're filling it in just like a page of paper, and it's one of those things where the more kind of similar you can keep the design, if you want to just go to those wiggly teeth marks back and forth, that's going to be perfectly fine. Let me show you how to wiggle up here. I'm just going to fill this with just a little L shape or a little E shape. That's another thing, letters are a great way to use circuit boards. So here I'm going to stitch a little letter E. Think kind of those boxy, blocky cartoon letters. That's a great way to stitch circuit board, because you already have that mental image of the letter in your mind. There was the letter C, kind of. I mean, you can get kind of rigid with that. That might be even more distracting. It's hard to say. Some people that really works for. Some people that's really distracting, because you get really obsessive about it looking like letters more than looking like just a random design. It's totally up to you. There's no right or wrong way to stitch this, and this design, just like stippling, would definitely benefit from some practice on a fat quarter sized practice sandwich. If you want to just baste up a fat quarter and run through very simple shapes, you know, quilt the entire thing. From the beginning it's not going to look great, but by the time you fill up an entire fat quarter, particularly if you stitch it on a dense scale like this, a really tight scale, you're going to see a great improvement by the time you finish that fat quarter up. and you'll be ready to tackle your block, whether you're marking it or you're going to stitch it entirely freehand. It's entirely up to you. And there we go. That's our 1/8 inch scale circuit board. You can see spots where the lines get a little further apart and a little closer together. That is the point of freehand quilting. It's supposed to look organic. It's supposed to look like a real person stitched it, not a machine. So remember, you're not a machine, and this is beautiful. However you stitch it is beautiful. So that's it for stitching circuit board in our building block. We learned this design stitching it out in a lot of different scales. So which one's your favorite? Remember, if you get bored with stippling, if you've been quilting for a while and you've been stippling a lot and you're totally bored with that design, start looking into designs like circuit board. This whole family, I'll call them independent designs. They all work very similarly to stippling. Most of them are kind of wiggly, wobbly, no crossing of the lines of quilting, and they're very forgiving of mistakes. If you can stitch stippling really well, chances are you can stitch every single design in that family, and there's probably over 20 or 30 designs there to choose from, so there's a lot to choose from, a lot to play with. If you're feeling bored, that's something to pay attention to. And I really strongly encourage you, if you're feeling bored with anything with quilting, you're looking for more challenge, is basically what your mind is saying, I'm bored, I'm tired of this, please give me some more challenge to think about. It's really easy to stay in that stage where you don't really want to try new things because, hey, you're really good at what you do. I see this a lot in piecing. You know, people get really good piecing and they don't want to try applique because, well, it'll be tough and it'll be different and you'll have to learn a lot more stuff with it. But you know what? If you're starting to get bored and frustrated and you're not seeing what you want to see in your quilts, it means you need to try something new. You need to not stay stuck at where you're at. I really encourage you to get practice with these designs. Stippling and circuit board, a fat quarter-size practice sandwich, is not a waste of your time, and particularly if you stitch it densely on a 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch scale, you're going to get loads of bang for your buck. You're going to get loads of practice. According to the piecing instructions for this block, you will end up with an extra block this month. If you want to use that for stitching stippling or for circuit board, either way, it's going to be a good use of your time, and you're going to see a great amount of difference between one block and another. So I encourage you to play with that. I encourage you to practice and understand that practice is never a waste. It's a way to build and a way to grow. And that's how I got as good as I did, as quickly as I did. And I want you to understand that too. This was not something I was born doing. This was not something that I learned overnight, but it is something I worked very hard at, and I stitched a lot of quilts really densely. And that's how I built the skill so fast. So my name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Pick up your copy of the Building Blocks quilt pattern and join us as we learn loads about piecing and free motion quilting together. Pick up your copy of the pattern at leahday.com. Until next time, let's go quilt. It's going to be a lot of fun, but we're going to get some tips and tricks. It's going to be a lot of fun, but it's not any fun at all. No fun. All right, here we go.